and they often lead to advocacy. So as our members know, we have well-developed positions on education that have come from research and consensus up from the local leagues through the US League. And so on the screen here is the summary of the Denver position, where we have support for quality education for all Denver children, long-range planning of school facilities, programs more responsive to individual needs, and increasing communications between schools and communities. No small feat if we did all of those perfectly, right? But that's our goal. The full text of the position can be found on our website under About the League and then Advocacy. So Andrea, let's take a look at the upcoming briefings, if you wouldn't mind, sorry. October is our Get Ready for Elections month, and we'll be discussing the Denver ballot issues on Tuesday, October 18th. We're still working on the plan for the state issues, so stay tuned. We'll be sending out information on that. And then in November, we'll be taking on immigration, another pretty big topic that we'll be doing then. So a few housekeeping notes before we get started. As Andrea said, we are recording. We're excited to have so many guests. If you are from another organization, we'd love it if you could put that into chat so that we know where other organizations that might be represented here. And if you could please use chat to ask questions during the talk, and I'll be back for the question period at the end, and we'll present the questions to Dr. Marrero. And the chat area also turns out to be a really good place for sharing information with each other, so feel free to use it there as well. Use that for that. And Andrea has muted everyone so that we can make sure that we hear our speaker clearly, and we'll be we do that a lot, so don't be surprised if you get muted. Towards the end, hopefully we'll have a time where we can unmute a bit as well. All right, I think that's it. I'll hand it over to Sally Ogden now to introduce our exciting speaker, and I'll see all of you later in the hour.
Hi, everyone. I am most pleased to be able to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Alex Marrero, Superintendent of the Denver Public Schools. You've probably read the information about his background, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that. So he has more time to share with us. We're all anxious to hear how he views DPS after his first year, and we want to hear what's going to be happening. Equity and adequate resources are core to our state league positions, and those follow nicely into the new strategic roadmap for DPS, titled DPS Thrives, whose mission is to make sure every learner thrives. Personally, I'm thrilled to have an educator in charge of DPS, somebody who has been in the classroom more than an hour or two on occasion. I'm certain you will find him as nice a guy as I have found him when I've met him at grade ed luncheons. And you're probably as curious as I to know whatever possessed him to leave a state that is first in funding for education and first in teacher salaries to come to a state that has competitive teacher salaries number 50, and we fall somewhere below 40th for school funding. So I've decided he's a guy who wants a challenge, and we want to hear that he is up to that. And we'll do good things for our children in Denver. So I present to you Dr. Alex Marrero.
Thank you, Sally. Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to join you all, and I can't wait to the Q&A. That's always the most exciting piece. I have prepared a slide deck, and with permission, I'll go through that because I think it does a great job of illustrating the roadmap, Sally, that you mentioned. I want to go deeper into how I built it, and I'll end in terms of reflections. Then we'll go into Q&A. That sounds like a plan? All right, very good. Let me see if I can share screen. Okay, if you all give me a thumbs up, what do you see? Can you see this slideshow? Thumbs up if you do. Very good. Okay. All right. So as Sally mentioned, Every Learner Thrives is our, not only is the motto of this roadmap, it is our vision. I'll get into that in a moment. In terms of what I plan to address, just these 3 points. Some of those will be meaty, so I predict 10 to 15 minutes for this entire presentation. Let's dive right into it. So when I first came on over, I was blessed with the opportunity from our Board of Education to listen and learn. A deep listening and learning tour ensued as soon as I arrived. These included in-person events and surveys. In terms of in-person, it was over 30 for meetings. 76% of the listening and learning tour events focused on historically underrepresented demographic groups. I had a saying, the loudest always gets heard. The one that knows how to navigate the system will always navigate the system. The one who has access to either the superintendent's seat or the board members will execute that privilege. All of that happened within the first week. So I made it a point for the next 36 weeks to ensure that I went to those historically underrepresented groups. More than 50% of those events were citywide. So far, far northeast, deep, deep, deep southwest. Knowing that we can't touch everybody, we captured surveys, and we had well over 10,000 responses and surveys from students, families, and staff. From this input, we identified what was going well in DPS, what needs improvement in DPS, and advice that they had for me as a superintendent who's not from the area. So those 3 questions were the repeated asks. If some of you participated in that, you will remember those 3 questions. So what was going well? The work of the DPS teachers, available non-academic supports is what I was hearing. The district's focus on equity and COVID precautions. These are some of the things that I would hear about what was going well in DPS. What needed to improve in DPS, so as that second question, was academic success, course offerings, communication with families. Those really were headed to the top in terms of those repeated themes. And advice that they had for me is always put students first, visit and get to know schools, listen, focus on equity. That was all part of phase 1, that green bar down below. Then we had a tremendous amount of data. So then I identified priorities, statements surrounding the work that the transition team assembled. And this transition team were 60 individuals broken up into 3 groups. One was the student experience and achievement group, one was the equity and excellence group, and one was the operational effectiveness group. So again, I gathered a tremendous amount of data. I said, this is what the community wants. I need help. So I assembled external and external members of the community, broke 60 up into groups of 20. And the student experience and achievement, they looked at creating conditions for students to learn and thrive through the whole child, cultivating students' academic growth and development, honoring and amplifying student voice and advocacy. Those were the 3 priorities that came out of student experience and achievement. And equity and excellence, it was using the equity-oriented information to develop this strategic plan that I'm about to get into, infuse equity throughout the employment cycle of our staff, and cultivate partnerships with equity-based engagement strategies between staff and families. Operational effectiveness had a heavy lift. So in short, they had transportation, culture, climate, enrollment, school choice, budget and finance, which I know are themes that we're going to address a little bit later. So when it comes to the listening and learning tour, specifically 3,724 students were canvassed, 5,487 forms from families, and close to 3,000 from staff. And these are the 3 questions that I mentioned. And again, what we heard, what was going well, is the work of the DPS teachers. There was a tremendous amount of praise considering we were just coming from the pandemic, in terms of what the teachers were able to do, and really all the stressors of recent DPS history, from the strike to the pandemic, to coming back. The district's focus on equity and COVID precautions was both in the what's going well category, but also in what needs improvement. So equity in terms of the perception and how it was being delivered, or even the definition in certain cases. Then we headed off to the transition teamwork. And the transition team, again, focused on those three subgroups: 20 members in student experience and achievement, 20 members in equity and excellence, 20 in operational effectiveness. And I mentioned what those were. Backwards, it was transportation, culture and climate, enrollment and school choice, budget and finance. 4 priorities for operational effectiveness subcommittee. For equity and excellence is to cultivate proactive partnerships for equity-based engagement between staff and families, infuse equity throughout the employment cycle of our staff members, and use equity-oriented information to develop this strategic plan. Those were 3 priorities. And in terms of the student experience, to create conditions for students to learn and thrive through the whole child, cultivate students' academic growth and development, and honor and amplify student voice and advocacy. Those were the 10 altogether. And so we had that, and then we started to build. And then we had an internal strategic team who started to build. And before we published it, we vetted it with the who's who of education. I can't mention the name because it was anonymous. But just know you've read their books before. They gave us the go ahead, and we launched the strategic plan. The strategic plan was broken down into 3 experiences. We're looking to reshape the DPS experience so that every learner thrives, as Sally mentioned. And how we're going to do that, this DPS experience, we believe, are broken down into 3 experiences: the student experience, the adult experience, and the system experience. This student experience portion is the center of the DPS experience. It's what we are tasked to do, is why we show up to work each and every day. That, along with the adult and the system experience, together reframe education as a series of experiences that promote an exchange of ideas, the pursuit of passion, which many folks have lost, not just students, or adults as well, because of everything that I mentioned already, and the quest for justice, educational equity, language justice, and that's a very long list. In terms of this specific section, the student experience section, we share how we will create learning environments, pathways, and opportunities that expand students' learning experiences so they can flourish as young people ready for the post-pandemic society. We are preparing students for roles that we don't even know what they are. And that's very difficult to do. We've heard the saying of building the plane as we're riding it. It's even beyond that, right? So we don't know what these workforces are going to be because technology is so quickly evolving, but we have to make sure that we address not only the student experience, but the adult experience, which I get to in a moment. In terms of strategies for the student experience, we're looking at developing learning experience that will cultivate curiosity, right? Because perhaps the students, have the answer on what the workforce or the careers that they choose are going to look like. So we'll facilitate the exploration to expand the academic opportunities within and outside of the classroom. We have a slogan, "Discover the World of Opportunity," which is on a lot of our materials and even in our logo. We're really going to honor that, right? So we're looking to expand the classroom. So whether it's cultural proficiency, global competency, taking our work beyond the confines of the 4 rooms. One of the silver learnings of the pandemic, that we can do more than what's in the 4 dimensions of the walls of the classroom, and the days of pushing chalk are passé. Really want to ignite the passion of all, and we will prioritize our marginalized students on an accelerated trajectory, providing them added support. So equal opportunity is necessary, and it's not sufficient to eliminate the persistent student gaps. And here in DPS, there was a lot to highlight, but a tremendous amount of work still needs to happen. The gaps have always been the same based on the previous Denver 2020 plan that I analyzed. They have been absolutely historically persistent in terms of students who are achieving, in particular, our white students. And when it comes to our historically marginalized Black, Latino, and Native American, quite frankly, in that order, our Black students are trailing behind our white students. Our Latino students are trailing the Black students, and our Native American, most recently, are the ones who are trailing all. We know we'll be successful with the student experience by measuring perception and experience with our new student experience index. So improving grade level attainment, closing gaps among student groups, and ensuring strong post-secondary workforce development. So it is what we are in charge to do. Now I want to get into the adult experience. It outlines the ways that our adults are intentionally will collaborate across schools with those who know the students best outside of their families. And I want to really emphasize on why this is important. I've seen so many strategic plans. I also am guilty of this as well. This is a roadmap, as Sally mentioned. This is not a plan. We've learned from the pandemic that you can't be so rigid. So no matter what happens, we'll never lose sight of where we're headed to be potentially when it comes to the outcomes of this roadmap. A plan is rigid and you have to put it to the side and come up with priority statements, as many districts like we did during the pandemic. A roadmap does not go away. So one of the major learnings from the pandemic. Our adult experience is critical because I do not see this often on strategic planning. And I have a saying, a student will never learn if they don't feel safe, secure, and nurtured. And I think everybody will agree with that. I would say same applies with our adults. Our adults, if they don't feel safe, supported, validated, and empowered, they're never going to deliver on what they've been trained to do, which is make sure that our students learn. So fostering opportunities for intentional collaboration across our schools and team members. When I came on in, I instantly felt it. There was not a lot of collaboration, a whole lot of unhealthy competition. This school versus this school, and even worse, I want that kid over this kid. We're going to recruit and retain high quality workforce, prioritizing diversity in that workforce. We're heading to a conference next week in Puerto Rico, and we plan to do quite a bit of recruiting there to ensure that we have our multilingual language, Spanish-speaking classrooms ready for now and the future. And of course, engaging with those that know the students best, outside of our teachers who are our parents when they send us our those precious souls that are our kids. I'm referring to our families, making sure that we have true engagement. The last section is our system experience. And this is a massive system, 90,000 plus students, 14,000 employees, the largest employer in Denver. So we have to take a strategic approach. And here's where I want to address the elephant in the room, because although it has been pointed out throughout many plans and even initiatives, and it's even a core value, which is equity, the word that I'm referring to, it still remains elusive, as the great Dr. Bailey mentioned. Unfair and inequitable student outcomes are part of DPS's past, and quite frankly, it's present, because our educational system was designed to be unfair and equitable. And the results that we're dealing with now is because we were perfectly designed to get those results. I don't think that happens by mistake. So our system experience will be transformed by uprooting and eliminating ineffective and even oppressive systems. So this roadmap, we're laying out ways to disrupt and dismantle oppressive and supremacy in our systems that perpetuates each and every day. At the same time, respectfully getting better and highlighting what's working well and going back to that adult experience of collaboration. We will be measuring success and keeping it the community abreast. And why? Because the community are the ones who are the authors of this plan. So I was often asked when I came on board, why, Dr. Marrero, haven't you told us what your vision for this district is? And I struggled in responding to that question, because who am I? Someone from Bronx, New York, who, as Sally mentioned, we had quite a bit of resources at our disposal. We had tremendous amount of challenges over there. It is New York. But who am I? And quite frankly, who is anyone to come in and say, okay, here's how you fix it? If that's the case, it would have been fixed. So I believe in being a public servant. I am a community-led, district-supported superintendent. So this was the best way for me to say, community, you tell me what you all want and allow me to condense and give you the output that is the roadmap, because those are your needs, wants, and desires. So that was my year-end reflection. And also that there's a tremendous amount of work to do. There's a deep commitment here in Denver to education that we can't dispute, but there are also tremendous amount of competing priorities. And at sometimes there are even some adults that have ulterior motives, meaning students aren't first. They could be second, third on the list, but some other reason is driving the decisions that they have been making or desire to make. So I'll leave you all with this before we get into Q&A. I'm incredibly grateful that the board selected me over a year ago. I think it's 14 months now. But the best thing that I think DPS did was hire someone from the outside, because what I learned very quickly when I met folks and I drew my own conclusions and made my own, drew my own opinions, that in here, there's so many connections that everybody's tied to someone or some initiative or some priority, or even worse, some reform. Right? Because reform here has a negative connotation. In my world, reform means that you're going to do something differently. So I was impartial, didn't know a soul, making my own conclusions, and ultimately making my own alliances, especially if they are students first. So thank you, League of Women Voters, and let's engage, because this is how I learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marrero. That was really a fascinating look at your first year and the plan for going forward. Leaguers often have lots of questions, and particularly for education initiatives, because you know, as you said, this is so important. This is our future, our children and our future. So we have quite a few questions. The first one is, what steps is DPS taking in teacher recruitment and retention, particularly teachers of color?
Oh, great question. I know I touched on that. So first, we know that we need to continue to provide an opportunity for a young scholar to thrive in each and every way. I am a person of color, and I was not afforded that opportunity. But as a young adult, when I saw someone that had a doctor before their name and spoke the same language as I did, which my native language is Spanish, what it did to me was remarkable. So I only imagine what that would have done to me as a youngster, meaning as a grade school student. So, and also we can really get into the technical. Research has shown the importance of having schools that are racially diverse in terms of their workforce, increasing teachers and leaders of color representation in order to close achievement gaps. I see also a question there in terms of persistent issues when it comes to our Black students, and part of that answer is the fact that they may not have the role model in front of them. I know that students of color have a higher likelihood of graduating when they have access to diverse teachers. Math and reading achievement growth for students of color by third grade increases. This is fact. This is research I've done when they have access to diverse teachers. And students of color are more likely to be assigned to gifted services and less likely to be labeled with the behavior issues, or even worse, sent off to a special ed destination without the proper diagnosis or evaluation. So what we're doing, we're being very, very, very intentional on how we're recruiting. So we work with an HR partner and a specialist to support best practices in sourcing, interviewing, hiring, and how to reduce the impact of unconscious bias, which exists in terms of the hiring. This can be done through personnel committees, which we're training each and every year. So that's how we're doing it internally. And also developing and executing an equity-focused interview selection process. In terms of how we're extending our reach, I mentioned briefly in that presentation, but we plan to attend DPS-sponsored hiring events and external career fairs at NABSE, which is the National Black Organization of Leaders, and ALAS, which is the one I referred to that we're heading to in a couple of weeks. ALAS stands for the Association for Latino Superintendents and Administrators. So we're really expanding our reach, but it just doesn't mean to get them. The other piece is to, aside from recruiting, is retaining educators of color. And throughout the years, I've seen a tremendous amount of educators of color who've left. So I've done the analysis. So we have a program called Success by Design, which is a collaboration of DPS departments and community partnerships that have been implemented to strategically focus on cultivation efforts for educators of color. And additionally, the Equity Project has been launched by what we call our CELT team to provide training for all central and school-based employees to cultivate anti-racist mindset and promote culturally responsive practices. So a tremendous amount. What I can do is I can give you all a breakdown of all the efforts so I can get to the other questions. But this is one of the major lists for our new Chief of Talent, Mr. Edwin Hudson, a fellow leader of color, who is taking this not only personally, but also has a similar story to what I experienced as a young adult.
There's a couple more about teachers, not just teachers on this one. Will DEI training be mandatory and ongoing? I think you touched on it in your last answer. And then are you recruiting from HBCUs for young teachers?
So yes, it is mandatory. However, I think it goes beyond that, because asking someone to sit behind a screen and follow a module doesn't shift the mindset, right? So I think it's more of the experience and that intimacy that's lacking, because we had it as a requirement before I arrived, and I still encountered what I encountered. So I think we will take it to the next step. And in terms of HBCUs, absolutely, we have a school that not only has that identity, but works with them. The issue there is the pipeline. And here's where I'm going to get on my soapbox for a little bit. But if you have presidents of universities, please tell them that I'm concerned. And if I'm concerned, everybody should be concerned. The cost of tuition to be an educator is skyrocketing. So the bar goes this way. And the interest for our workforce, meaning teachers, educators, paras, social workers, and so on, is this way. It's literally a chart that goes like this. So we will not have those professionals if we do not fix the broken system. And how we plan to do it is through apprenticeship programs, which our students who are here, whether it's our technical college, our community college, or our local colleges, so we can come up with a pipeline so our students become their students here in Denver and ultimately become our professionals. Sounds great. I'm excited about it, but I'm concerned because the cost of tuition keeps skyrocketing.
Yeah, it's scary, right? What efforts are in place? This is a completely different topic. What efforts are in place to help the Board of Education become more functional? It's not exactly under your purview, but if you have some, some thoughts.
No, thank you for that question. So here's what I can say. I love the public education model. Here's why. Public servant, community-led. Aside from me tapping everybody on the shoulder when I see them out and about in the streets of Denver and asking them, hey, what would you like to see? Which is unreasonable. Well, this is a large metro. The public election, duly elected process, I should say, is a beautiful thing. Meaning, theoretically, this is how it's supposed to work. We all vote for who we want because they have similar beliefs to what we want, and they're going to deliver in terms of policy. So if that model works well, I'll have 7 voices of you all, meaning I can come to them and say, okay, what would the Northeast want? What does Central want? What does the at-large Denver community want? So that's why I love this model, because the Board of Education, quite frankly, represents the entire community. And I have an incredible working relationship with them. Absolutely professional, very functional, very productive. I want to acknowledge that right now, of course, amongst themselves, they don't have that functioning relationship. What I can say is that they're working with consultants and mediators. Actually, at this very moment, I know 2 board members who are engaged in mediation. So those are the efforts that they're taking. But in terms of operation and feedback, there's nothing that is an obstacle in terms of what I am tasked to do. So I want to acknowledge that it's out there, right? We read about it all the time, and some of us even observe it when we watch the board meeting. But that doesn't infiltrate in terms of what we're doing as a school district. They're the governing board. They're above me.
That's encouraging. I'm glad to hear that. Violence has been increasing in and around DPS schools. I'd like to know the plan for helping our kids, keeping our kids safe and helping serve kids with mental health support.
Oh, yes.
It's a big
I
one
have a
too, right?
saying here in when I want to really motivate my team, because as you can imagine, this gets really intense and there are some tough decisions that we have to make. But my saying is, hey, I sleep well at night, meaning they're tough decisions, but it's not as if any decision that I make keeps me up, because I believe in what I do and the rationale on why I made those decisions. The one thing that has forced me to toss and turn as of late has been the violence in and around our schools. So I want to be very clear that I am concerned as the leader of Denver Public Schools, and hopefully this is not going to happen, but I'm dreading the day in which I have to respond to a parent, or even worse, at a press conference. The situation is that dire. So much so that I've commissioned, and it's not going to be a DPS joint task force, because DPS has its notoriety. DPD has its notoriety. So it's going to be joint. I won't be the head, quite frankly. I don't even know if I'm going to participate. I want to be advised on the next steps, but it's DPD, DPS. I'm going to say Aurora, who had major challenges, Aurora Public Schools last year. A joint effort so we can address the access that our students have, regular, easy access to firearms. It's concerning. I'm from New York, and I've never seen something like this. And New York has this history of being the melting pot of crime. I've never seen the daily interactions with DPD that I have since I've arrived, but even more so this academic year. If you weren't aware, we had a shooting right off campus last week, and it was painful for me to see the student and the wound, which is a face wound, but also not have answers for mom and dad at the hospital, at the ER. After that, another confiscated loaded weapon. Today's no exception. And yesterday, as you saw in the news, we had a scare because we have to respond accordingly. It is the most concerning, not to say that everything that we're dealing with isn't a priority. Of course, we have major priorities when it comes to our disenfranchised students, our special ed students, but this is the one that'll stop all progress if we don't get this correct. So don't have an answer aside from Joint Commission, because it's not Dr. Marrero, it's not Mayor Hancock. So it's happening in and around our schools. And I believe parents need to be held accountable. I know this is going to be a little controversial, but some of these weapons some are illegal and some belong to an adult, and the students should not have access to those loaded weapons.
So not quite as encouraging. That's scary and a hard problem for sure. Let's see. Neighborhoods in Denver are segregated by economics, and the local schools reflect that division. Schools of choice attracting students outside their neighborhood are one solution. Will you support more magnet schools in the future, like Denver School of the Arts or schools of science and technology?
Well, I love this question because it allows me to answer the question that I was asked when I was doing the listening and learning tour. I would ask my 3 questions: what's working well, what needs to improve, what advice do you have? And I would say, hey, are you pro district like your board, neighborhood school, or are you reformer like the former board? And you can imagine how that question came out depending on who's asking that question. And my response has been and still is, I'm pro quality schools. So if the school is doing well, I will highlight that school. So I'll tell you, DSST, in terms of what they do well, getting kids into college, they should be celebrated. DSA, and one of the best graduations that I attended, in terms of what they do well, in terms of the creativity and where the students go from Sarah Lawrence into the trades. My alma mater, Fordham, where Denzel Washington went and speaks to them often. I'm very supportive of that. At the same rate, I'm a product of a public school, and I wonder what would have happened if I had choice. We didn't even think that was even in our realm of possibility. We just had you go to the school just because. In terms of magnet school, I actually was an assistant principal in a magnet school, a technology school, and we had 99% free and reduced lunch. So my answer to that specific question yes, I'm very supportive of it, but it needs to be inclusive to make sure that everybody has access to it, which is not the case in certain schools. I mentioned DSA in terms of their creativity, but there's a lot of work that they need to do in terms of making sure that all students get that opportunity. We may be familiar in terms of crystallized intelligence. Terrific. Perhaps I've earned that later in my career, but I had potential that was untapped as a youngster, right? So I could have been on, Lord knows, I'm happy that I'm here, but perhaps it was a different a route for me and my brother, my cousin, and Miguel from the fourth floor. And we were not afforded that opportunity. So pro-quality schools.
So we have a couple questions about school closures, and this one ties into what you were just talking about with charter schools. How will decisions about school closures be impacted by the strong lobby of well-funded charter networks?
All right, so you hear it first. We will be consolidating schools, and I'm not here to start. I just need to start announcing it. There's in October, late October, I plan to come out with a slate of schools. I don't know if it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, but it is unfortunately unavoidable. We have a tremendous amount of declining enrollment. We had a persistent declining enrollment for the last couple of years. This year it's been validated. We're waiting until October 1st, which is what we call October count, because things remain for the year in terms of funding. So I can't make a decision before that. But what I can say is that we are the largest property owner in Denver. And although there's a lot of state statute, and I know there's a lot of strife and intent, and even past practice of using spaces for charters. That is not what I plan to do. I also do not plan to sell off any property, because I do believe that we'll have a dip, which we're currently in, but then we're going to have a need for more schools because they're building all over Denver. So I do anticipate that's going to result in more school-aged children. So we will consolidate schools. We don't know who they are yet, but also in terms of the plans for those school buildings, there are other things that we need. For example, we're Denver Public Schools. Why do we have to pay for professional development services because we don't offer it in-house? So why can't we convert a space into an in-house professional development that all of our 200 plus schools can use? To me, it's a no-brainer. We shouldn't spend money, taxpayer money, to go out to Douglas County to use someone else's space. And we also have our foundations, whether it's the Denver Public Schools Foundation, Denver Scholarship Fund, and the list goes on, who provide service for our students. Their mere existence is for our students. I believe that they should be afforded the opportunity to also be housed on our property because they serve our students. So I'm not concerned in terms of what we're going to do with the space, but in terms of past practice of automatically closing a district-run school and then becoming a charter, that's not going to be an automatic response from this administration.
So to follow up on that a little bit, one of our participants researched fundraising data about that they believe is creating more inequity between school buildings. How does DPS address the private fundraising that's creating inequity between school buildings?
Yeah, I think you may be referring to what happens in our innovation zones. Yeah, so no, that's not what we're.
No, sir, it is not. I am talking about PTOs, foundations, PTAs.
Oh, okay.
In
All
my
right.
own little can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
All right. So if I understand it correctly, is that obviously certain schools in certain parts of the neighborhood who may not even have a PTO or PTA. And there are others who, last I checked, generate $250,000 per year. Right? Yeah. So blatant inequity happens in every district across America. That's really hard to decipher because
no, it's not, sir. All you have to do is go to the IRS website and look at the 990s. The information is there.
I'm
the
sorry.
IRS form 990s all 501c3s, not-for-profits, have to file an annual 990. All you have to do is research those 990. I looked at 40 schools just last month to see what their filings are with the IRS. 40 of these schools are raising over $4 million. That's only 1/5 of the DPS schools. I know there's much more. I'm actually beginning to believe that our private PTOs and PTAs may be raising close to $1 billion a year. How does DPS plan to address this huge problem?
So, pardon, I didn't say it was hard to decipher in terms of gathering the data. You're right. The data is public, is easy to find. Addressing the issue is the issue. So that's where I was headed in terms of my response. That I can easily say that we can go ahead and put a tax and we distribute it evenly, but you know what will happen immediately? The donors will stop donating. So it is a major issue. And this is where choice is a great thing, because flexibility and options, who doesn't want that? And initially, as you all lived through, and I can only imagine, I've read through it in terms of case studies, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, incredible. But after you get to that point, choice clearly skews towards the privilege. And that's where we are now. So don't have an answer, right? Because that is a major issue. But here's what I would say. If I had it my way, is the Denver Public Schools Foundation works very intimately with us, and they exist for us. Richard Tagley, who's the new CEO, sits on my district leadership team. I say, in a perfect world, we have the same amount of generous donations routed to the foundation, and then the foundation is aligned to our strategic initiatives, and then that's how you equitably distribute it. On paper, sounds like a great plan. In reality, you know the type of pushback that I will receive.
Okay, another topic sort of dear to my heart is special education. There was a question on how will you and the board revise the special education focus of Denver Public Schools? Do you believe in putting special ed kids in regular classrooms? There was another question, I believe, on special ed kids in charter schools.
Okay, yeah. So this has been in the news as of late, and I see a partner of ours who's also in attendance. Greetings, Pam. And I'm happy. I know some folks probably think that this is a tremendous black eye for the district, without a doubt, but a black eye that I'm definitely going to wear, and my team is going to own. I also want to point out the obvious, that this is a perfect example of persistent inequities in our system. It doesn't happen overnight. So we were perfectly designed to get the results that are now very public, and now the attention is on DPS. I welcome that, right? So much so that before we received that notice, late last spring, I identified our special ed and our AN centers as an area that I needed to dismantle for the board to approve and ultimately evaluate me on as a superintendent. So I was able to identify that in terms of our areas of dismantling oppressive systems. So I was tasked to identify 2. I named 3. One of those 3 is our special ed program that has historically targeted our Black students in particular, and others as well. In terms of what model, there are so many ways that special ed can support our students. So no, I'm not going to subscribe that all students should be mainstream. That is an incredible way to ultimately have.
I hate to interrupt you, but I'm a parent of a child in SPED, and long before I had children, I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and long before I had children, I work with adults and children with developmental disabilities, and I've seen inclusion models that work. The thing is, when we continue to put our children that do have special needs or in special ed away from everyone else, what that does is that creates this ongoing segregation, if you will. And it creates a system of othering children. If we want our children to learn how to be together, they have to be included all of them in the process of education, not put in the back of the school where nobody can hear them screaming. That is what has been happening. I have a 23-year-old that graduated from Denver Public Schools, and he was in SPED from 2nd to 12th grade because he is dyslexic. I know what it does when we segregate our children. I'm 54 years old, and I've never known what equitable and inclusive systems look like. So that needs to be looked at. My apologies for interrupting, but that is very near and dear and close to my heart.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. Good to see you. So where I was headed, and then hopefully we can have another question. I don't know if we're good on time, is there isn't one way to address the issue because differently abled students have different needs, right? Here's where I think the issue is of Denver being a small but large city or a large but small setting. I'm going to reference New York City. New York City is New York City. 5 major boroughs and over 47 school districts. Within that one district, 1.2 million students. So you can imagine how many students we have that are magnified in terms of our need. But we had this district over there called District 75. Don't know if anybody knows New York City school system. And that was where, in essence, our high need population was. And that was thousands and thousands and thousands of students. So one will argue that they were all in one little mini district. However, we had the absolute best professionals supporting them. Now, what happened here was not that, right? What happened here is systematic saying, okay, I can't get to, so I'm going to send you over there, right? It was more of an absolute educational neglect on behalf of the system and the educator. So I do believe, and we've had charters that are specialized in this, and we can't call that charter as a place that you send students, is a place, quite frankly, that a student can flourish. So I guess it's how it's delivered, what's the purpose, and even before that, the intentionality before the referral comes in.
Thanks. Here's a question. It's a little long, so bear with me. DPS has always encouraged autonomy. Are there any topic schools, strategies, or training where the district will expect that all schools, staff participate and follow? And is the expectation there for charter schools, innovation, and traditional? And the examples given were IDEA, civil rights, consent decree.
Yes, so in our family of schools, all of our schools, whether the innovation charter district run, have to oblige by the state regulations, inclusive of the consent decree as well. Now, with that being said, there are certain flexibilities that some can execute, and that varies per school, right? And that gets into what Ms. Turner also mentioned in terms of, is it about the bottom line, about success and showing graduation rates and college admission rates, or is it about doing what's best for the student? So I do have an issue and I don't have an issue with autonomy. I was an autonomous principal and I was able to have the results because I didn't have someone hovering over me. But I also had ethics, right? So I was not going to, and I also had 99% free and reduced lunch and 90% Spanish speaking students in my one school in particular. So I had a very specific calling, I would say, to make sure that they had the opportunity. Others who may have, based on what we heard, the affluence and the incredible donation, may have a different calling and perhaps may want to opt out of certain things. So I'm all for flexibility, but I do wonder, back to motive that I opened up with, why some execute flexibility when it comes to certain flexibilities and they opt out of certain things. So that's the best way that I can answer that, because it's 200 different reasons why some have their plans in place.
So I apologize, I missed this question when we were talking special ed, but it was a question about Boulder starting to test kindergartners for dyslexia. Is DPS planning to do this?
Well, we're engaging with dyslexia screening. Yes, we are. I don't know if we will call it testing. We're actually going to talk about that in the next board meeting, so please tune in. Don't know exactly what Boulder is planning to do, but we are engaging in screening dyslexia. We've had a tremendous amount of support and advocacy from our partners on the national sector. So we'll call a testing screener as early as we can.
Sounds good. So we are all about registration, voter registration. So there was a question from our voter registration people about how can the Denver League help you with the implementation of the legal requirement to have deputy registrars in the high schools to enable students to get registered to vote?
Oh, I love this question. I'm going to ask you to connect with Paul Lopez, our county clerk, because 2 weeks ago, we sent out a joint message to all our high school students to encourage them to register, but also we're going to do some fairs at high schools. So perhaps it can be a trifecta. Maybe the county, DPS, you all can support so we can have a record amount of registered voters this upcoming year. So excited about that. We already started our hard work. And I also know that there is at least one board member who's really animated and activated in this regard as well. So let's all work together and make sure that we have an incredible turnout.
A question just came in about civics classes. Are they available for elementary, middle, and high schools?
No, not at all levels. This is a perfect example of flexibility. We can, if I were to mandate it at a certain level, someone, based on the feedback that they gather from their learning community, if they have 60% of the votes, they can opt out of that. So that's some of the perils and the frustrations of being the person, quite frankly, in charge, but you can progress monitor, right? And you can impose. So no, we currently do not. Our high schools do offer it, but it doesn't go down to all elementary and middle. But even if we did, unless it's coming from board policy or resolution, we will not be able to mandate it because some can execute flexibility and not offer it.
So Dr. Marrero, do you have time constraints? We still have some, but it's getting close to 6:30. I wasn't sure what your expectation was.
Well, I'm allotted to 6:30, but let's keep going. And at that time, I'll wave off, but we can sneak in a couple more questions in these 3 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. I don't think we can have this without asking about testing, right? How are state and federal testing requirements continuing to impact our schools, both in terms of cost and their effectiveness in improving instruction?
Yeah, this is a biggie. So this is not a matter of whether we're pro-test or anti-test. And we don't have time right now to engage in that dialogue, although I'm very curious to see how this group feels. But here's the harsh reality. We're in a system, a state, quite frankly, that puts a tremendous amount of emphasis on testing. So much so that for the first time, either ever or in recent history, Denver Public Schools is now yellow as a district. So we were green, now we're yellow, and under yellow, there's orange and then ultimately red. And you never want to be red because that's when the state comes in and threatens with takeover. So we went from green to yellow, not because of our scores, because of our participation rate, which was not up to their adequate measure. So that is a clear indication, or to me, as superintendent, that I have to advocate for at least 90% participation across our schools, or else we'll never remove that stench of being yellow and not being green, which then will have a major impact on enrollment because some parents may not want their child to attend a yellow district. So in terms of, do I think that's fair? I think it's absolutely unfair, right? Because I believe everybody has a choice, but it's the reality and the framework and the guardrails that have been imposed, not on DPS, but all the other districts in the state. Unfortunately for DPS, because we didn't hit that threshold, now we've been dinged, and now we're seen as a yellow district. So I would be advocating for testing because I know that we, and for two reasons. One, I don't want to have that stench unnecessarily put on our district. And secondly, there's a whole lot of uncertainty in terms of where our students are since the pandemic, that I would even challenge some parents who are have their reasons not to test to say, please test, because aside from it not being used as an evaluation, is really a gauge. It's a pulse on where we are, at least for this next iteration.
So sort of our wrap-up question is, are there some actions that we as League of Women of Denver and the citizens that have joined us on this can do to help support DPS teachers and students and you and what you are doing as you go forward?
Oh, there's so many things. First of all, thank you for the time. I think getting the message out definitely helps. I have a saying that if it bleeds, it reads. If it smells, it sells. So the media is always going to harp on what is scandalous, but they rarely celebrate the successes of what we have. And we have an incredible amount of students who've really broken down barriers. We have incredible educators that need to be highlighted. So whenever possible, visit your neighborhood school and just say a thank you. And hopefully that starts to take traction, and maybe the media will pick up on the great things that DPS is doing. I ask you all to send this message as far as you possibly can in terms of where we're headed, that this community plan, the strategic roadmap, is from the community. It is not something that I cooked up on my own. And if you're willing, our teachers need support. So if you have time to volunteer, I know I covered a class and I'm going to do some crossing guarding next week. It goes a long way and also keeps you connected to where the magic happens in our incredible school buildings. And of course, practically speaking, let's collaborate on making sure that we can have our high schoolers registered to vote.
Be great. Sally, do you want to take us out tonight? You have to unmute first. There you go.
My tech skills continually get challenged here. You know, I want to thank you, Dr. Marrero, for spending time with us. I think it's been very informative, and I think my pleasure at having an educator in charge has been reinforced here. And I wish you well, and we all do, and we'll see what we can do to help out.
Thank you all. I hope to get invited back. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Please come back to our next briefing too.